Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore our relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, AC Stauble
and Isaac Hill. Okay, so welcome to another episode of the Plant Cunning Podcast. And today we have some old friends of mine, Merlin and Crystal, back from the Pittsburgh days. Merlin and Crystal have a school called the School of Heaven and Earth, and Matthew Merlin is an astrologer and an herbalist, and Crystal is an herbalist and an astrologer, but it's kind of weird to have a similar thing going on. It's like,
yeah, I've just seen it with a couple people where there's a husband-wife duo where they each know a little bit, but the man goes more towards the heavens and the sky, and the woman with the earth and the plants.
Yeah.
I know several couples who are, there's an astrologer and an herbalist.
That's funny.
Yeah, it really is it's like a archetypical form now.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, a lot of tradition around that approach too.
Holding that as above, so below pole.
Yeah.
Working it.
Yeah, working it.
So tell us a little bit about yourselves. What brought you to the paths of the plants and the planets?
Start?
Well, yeah. So for me, I first started getting really into astrology when I was in college, and I was getting a degree in classics and philosophy and studying ancient Greek, and I was fascinated by a lot of the mystery traditions from ancient Greece, ancient Egypt at that time, and I knew that they were doing some kind of astrological practice during that period, but I didn't really have the tools or the means at that point to really get into it. I finally really dove in when I was studying with Adam Ellenboss and was exposed to the materials of Robert Schmidt and the first translations of a lot of those ancient astrological texts. And along the way, through Crystal and her herbal practices, I started picking up some plant knowledge here and there. And just the way that we practiced, and I think around the first time that we started when we started doing readings together about 6 years ago now, it always had a really strong focus on using astrology practically and predictively. I have a huge Capricorn stellium in my chart. I am not very interested and excited about a bunch of like psychological, poetic, eloquent waxings. It's not as interesting to me. I'm interested in results. I want to know what is going to be happening in my life down the road. I want to know what's going to be happening concretely for everybody down the road. I want to know what tomorrow is going to look like as much as I possibly can. And I want to know what I can do with that information so that I can, heal my life and heal the lives of students and clients that come to me too. So that's where we start bring in, remediation practices like they have in India already, an unbroken lineage of that we've lost in the West, trying to revitalize something practical for astrology over here.
Cool.
And of course, bring in ritual magic too, and spiritual practice to connect with the planets in a very, very grounded, tangible way, be initiated by them, be transformed by them from the inside out, so that you can become not just a technically proficient astrologer, but a really intuitive, psychic, spiritually connected astrologer. That's basically how I got into the path and what I've always been interested in and what I focus on in my practice.
Yeah. And I think it was also just like along the lines of just astrology, just filling in, because I know for Matthew's like, it's all, it's very, very practical. I know that there's this other end too, which I know aligns with Jyotish that you study. It's like, it's also a tool for spiritual development.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we were already ritual magicians or, ceremonialists and, different veins when we started studying with Adam and getting really excited about all these new texts that were just being discovered and, opportunities for Matthew to, use his ancient Greek to help study, to help study these texts that they're still there. Like this is still a project that's, that we actually need more people to learn the ancient Greek and take up so that we can have a more complete picture. Right. But I was going to say, he's like, very practical, but it's like one of those, practical things is learning how to throw fireballs one time.
Yeah.
That's quite literally that.
He's like, Tumor's like, oh yes, it's super practical.
That can be practical too, especially in a survival situation. You never know what's going to happen. Yeah. No, but it's just that kind of like this, like a city path or that kind of thing, which is more, I think, acceptable within the Taoist veins that I approach and that I study in than maybe in India. But are those kinds of things just as signs and markers of spiritual development
I'm
that
mostly
you're on the
just
right
joking.
track. Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. I mean, there's certainly a contrast between, on the one hand, wanting to be super practical, and on the other hand, trying to get people more further and further up the spheres of the heavens, which is certainly a more intuitive approach as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely have found that initiation is very practical.
Yeah.
Because it does make you a better astrologer, makes you a better human, and then
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's helped me grow,
Yeah.
in initiating
100%.
into the spheres, definitely.
Yeah. And you can
So
help people so much better if you've gone through some real internal transformations.
yeah, yeah. So you also mentioned the Taoism. Would you maybe go into a little bit about that, like what that a path was for you too?
Yeah. So I first started practicing like just qigong and meditation and that kind of thing back in 2014. And yeah, but I think I didn't really hit it super hard until I met, my teacher, Eric Randolph. You maybe know him from Pittsburgh, he's a senior master with the ICMIA, which is a Chinese martial arts community, and also a very, very proficient internal alchemist. And so just discovering like finding a real master who can help you really go into these deeper states of awareness was really, really, really pivotal for me. And I always just resonated with the Taoist approach in particular because there's more openness to things like magic and ritual and that kind of thing. And there's also a very, very strong focus within the Taoist approach on working with the planets and the stars. They have that in India too, specifically within the Jyotish tradition. But there's all of these elaborate methods of star stepping and calling down energy from different constellations and different mudras and hand seals that connect with different planets. And they have their own approach to astrology there that's, mostly, I think, derivative from Vedic and classical systems. But it always just felt like a good fit. And I think so much of the open-eyed, seated meditations that you do, where you're cultivating and raising energy to apply and project it, manifest it, using energy work for healing, has just seemed like a very, very good fit with astrological magic and that kind of thing. And from the angle of being a medical astrologer and a healer, there's so much of the Taoist approach is centered around medicine. Of course, it's Taoist medicine that birthed traditional Chinese medicine. And so many of the different practices of energy healing that they carry are rooted in working with the planets and stars and calling different energies down from the heavens above to heal and transform people. And so not just working with plant medicines, and we're using horoscopes to diagnose based off of that, but also seeing how you can treat based off of your own gong, your own skill, your own power that you've cultivated too.
Yes.
So
Some of the
yeah.
Some of the things that he learned at the temple were really exciting. When he was in China last year, like I thought it was really fascinating, even like foundationally in acupuncture, they only use two needles, one that's charged in the sun through ritual and one that's charged in the moon through ritual.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like their like foundational practice for acupuncture is based off sect. Right, which is like
the doctrine of sect,
the daytime sect and nighttime sect. Which do you need toned?
Yeah,
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many of the like techniques of Taoist medicine that I had learned there, which they were very shamanic essentially. And I would walk around and I would see bundles of mugwort wrapped in red. And I'd say, oh, I've seen this kind of thing in like, native communities and this is like red rose.
yeah.
And they use it for their moxa, for this idea like mugwort is this extremely potent plant that can drive out evil spirits and evil pathogens from within the body. Is not very different from how it is used in North America at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Crystal, how about you? How did you get into herbal medicine and magic and astrology and all of these things as well?
Well, it's something like I think as with many of us, I think all of us probably, it started in childhood, right? I was always been fascinated by ways that I can. It started with a childhood desire to go live in the woods by myself and constantly on the lookout. It might have actually started with being raised in an extremely dysfunctional family and wanting to run away, but living in the middle of the woods. So running away involved being able to live in the being able to live in the woods by myself.
Right.
So it was always like, well, what could I eat if I ran away from home? How can I drink the water? How could I build a shelter? How can I build a fire? Right. And for me, that would have involved working with supernatural spirits to also take care of me. Right. So I had an interest in speaking to the invisible, right. And having non-human friends. Right. So I have always been, deeply animistic. Right. And always looking for those tools that would enable me to, develop the skill to, as tangibly as possible, interact with the living natural world around me and utilize it to be able to survive.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like I didn't really start. So I've always, had that mindset. And, took that into the world of poetry. Most of my career has been in the, weaving of the world, weaving of worlds and poetry and in words. And then that shifted when I had a really, fairly major health crisis. When I was 23, I had a stomach ulcer. So I had been on a lot of medications, and I got off all of the medications and, started looking for natural ways to heal. So that's when I started, really getting into medicinal herbs and natural healing. And then I had another kind of self-initiation. I tried to walk across the country by myself at first with a typewriter, which was completely insane, but I did make it 100 miles with a typewriter, writing poetry for people.
Very impressive.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was not a super fun 100 miles. It was not a good idea.
Okay.
But and on that walk, I just met really amazing people, and I ended up on the Ahanktawan Nakota Reservation in South Dakota, helping to build a house for an elder, and I just was taken in by some very lovely people who I think saw, or maybe were scared for me, maybe that I needed some help in exchange for some labor. They showed me some ways to, interact in new ways with my soul and with the world around me. And after that, I really dedicated myself to the plants and, being a channel for speaking to the invisible and helping others to, live in community with all these, beautiful teachers around us, rather than having, an exploitative mindset about just how we can use them. Right.
Yeah.
Which, completely fit with how I had, viewed and interacted with the world when I was a kid.
Awesome.
That's very awesome. And so who are some of your main teachers? Did you study with any teachers or mentors that you want to give a shout out to?
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, so my first really dedicated teacher, somebody that I worked with really closely. Well, there's many, but Preston Walking Bear was my first teacher on the reservation, and Lauren Zeh, who both of these people have, unfortunately, passed away. Lauren passed away during the COVID epidemic. And then Ola in Pittsburgh, Ola Tukumbo Obasi. And then after that, Ashley Lateki Ellenboss, and both of them work with the AHG and are taking students. And I highly recommend that people seek them out. And of course, today, one of my most beloved mentors is Julie McIntyre, who I think you all might know. You interviewed her husband, Stephen Herod Buhner, before he passed. He was, living legend. And his books, I mean, oh my gosh, completely rocked my world. And Julie continues to do so also with her profound wisdom. So many teachers, and many of the teacher people that you've had on, I absolutely love and, blow my mind on a regular basis. Of course, Matthew Wood, Phyllis Light. I don't know if you've had, Phyllis
Yeah,
on.
Yeah,
yeah,
we
Phyllis
have-
is great. So good.
Absolute
Yeah.
geniuses. Margie Flint, Susan Weed, wouldn't study in person with Susan.
Yeah, I know.
Wouldn't recommend
But
apprenticing with
love
her,
her
but
books. Love her
she's got some good books. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love you, Susan.
Yeah.
Hope you get help. You can cut that
Yeah.
out if you want.
No, I think people who know.
It's common knowledge at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, it's
So tell us a little bit about the school of heaven and earth and the impetus for that.
Yeah. So the School of Heaven and Earth is our way of working together, with my astrological heavenly focus and Crystal's more earthy plant-based focus.
In a hermetic
And
lens.
within a hermetic lens, which we think was originally the way that a lot of these tools and skills were used. We think that they were spending the ancients were spending so much more time outside, obviously, than we are, and the importance of being connected to the earth in the way that you live your life every single day was so obvious and taken for granted that it was never just explicitly talked about. So we're, in every sense, just trying to connect people more and more with what we call the enchanted world. So getting people to see the innate magic, essence, and spirit that is within everything, and seeing the energy that plants contain, doing practices to connect with the spirits of the land around you, doing plants to connect with the spirits of the heavens above, and starting in all ways, not just reading about these things in books or understanding them conceptually, but giving people practices so that they can encounter that magic face to face and really start to live in that world. One of the first practices that we give people is actually from the Tracker School and Tom Brown Jr., which is
You studied with him as well, right, Crystal?
yeah, we both
We both
You both
have.
did.
yeah.
Okay.
cool.
Yeah, we both have. Yeah, I did the
Do the full scout.
I did the scout class, which was amazing. Is getting 2 hours of sleep a night while a bunch of primitive skills ninjas chase you through the woods. 10 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah,
Cool.
you think you got to be a little bit of a masochist to chase initiations like that, but we both do it, and they call it they have a word for this there. They call it type 2 fun, where it's only
yes.
fun looking back. Yes, to show you.
Which means my whole life makes so much sense when I learned that concept. I was like, yes.
It's like my life.
Walking-
I'm not just a masochist. I like type 2 fun.
So was walking through the country, across the country with a typewriter type 2 fun for you?
Yeah.
So, but it's
Wow, in freezing weather, by the way. It was below freezing.
Oh my gosh.
Well, yeah, you were pitching your tent in snow.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
it was.
Oh my
It
God.
was a whole other level. I just tell you about the time I accidentally camped on a fracking pad because it was like the trail was super steep. So there wasn't anywhere on either side. It was like a drop off here and a mountain here. Right. So I'm like walking in the middle of the night and I'm like literally like weeping. I was like, oh, I'm such a fuck. And this is like, I have a flip phone, right? And I don't have signal. It's in the West Virginia. Like, I'm just gonna fucking die here. Right. Like I'm like full on in freak out mode. And then I see this open field and I was like, yes. I'm like super excited. I pitched my tent. I'm like super happy, I was like, okay, yeah, new day. And I open my tent, look out, and there's this line of trucks. Line of big tanker trucks. And a group of guys standing there looking at my tent, I just shut my tent, fuck my life. Fuck my life.
Oh my gosh.
It got better. But that was anyway, little story.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
so
Type 2 fun.
back to the school.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's an important story.
Yeah.
It's an important story.
Feels
For
important.
sure.
Yeah. It's a
Feels
good
important.
story. But yeah, we both, Crystal talking about her experience growing up in the woods. I didn't have as many opportunities to do those kinds of things. So I certainly wish I would have. But we give people sits, and for anybody listening to this is just finding a spot in the natural world, sitting down and observing.
Yeah.
And you're not necessarily doing anything with your breath or any sort of like meditative cultivation or anything like that. You are just sitting and you are noticing what is going around you. There's nowhere to be, there's nowhere to go. You're using wide angle vision, also known as owl vision, where you're just noticing your peripheries and noticing the whole screen of your sight. Which you do that enough, that itself can start to, open up your third eye and start connecting you with spirits if you get really into those kinds of practices. And then using your deer hearing. So it's harder to describe, but this almost imagining that all the sounds that you're hearing are taking up a kind of 3D space too. And you just sit with that open awareness and you relax and you just notice. And you'll feel as you sit and do that, that your energy and the energy of the earth around you start to sync up. You start to get plugged back into what the natural world, the natural cycles of the chi are doing. And there's a tremendous amount of healing and awareness that can be cultivated just by doing that. And you've said to me many times before that you can make a spiritual practice just out of walking in the woods. And you can, like Drew is just used to spend hours and hours and hours walking in the woods, noticing and observing. And that's even what the Jains do.
If you do the same paths, right? Like the practice is noticing what changes every day, right? Like if you walk the same paths at the same time, right? Then it's like you become, the goal is to become a part of and a caretaker of that ecosystem. So you're watching, you're listening. It's like, oh, well, where's the cardinal today, right? Like how are they, like how's everything moving? Right. And with this, you're taking an offering.
Yeah.
Right. Like you take an offering with you. So it's like there's something that you're feeding that you can be relied upon to contribute to your ecosystem. Or like, is there something that you can clean up? Like, is there a waterway that you can help run more smoothly? And it's like, then the animals actually, like all the life there, you becomes relying on you. You like actually become interconnected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like in a really physical way, not just, in a way that will then nourish you spiritually.
Yeah. And for people who are into magic, if we're into, like, they want to, I think many of the people listening to this, they want to be the real deal. They're very, very serious about their practice. They're very serious about their craft. There's a reason why so many masters became masters in the wilderness. I mean, there's reasons why there are, mountain ascetics, forest yogis, desert fathers. Very few people become completely enlightened and full of superpowers that they can use to transform the world around them by sitting in a box. It just doesn't really happen. And there's always people who want to see and experience and feel the energy of the heavens and the earth. They want to feel the magic. They want to experience magic. It's hard to do that in a box. I think Ptolemy, the astrologer Ptolemy, talks about how energy spirits from the heavens will come down, and as they are making changes in the world around them, they'll sync up and they'll link up with the nature spirits. And it's like the planetary spirits and the nature spirits like have a conversation, and then the effects happen on Earth. So you want to experience that change, you want to experience the union of the above and the below, you got to go outside.
Yeah.
And you two get that for sure.
You two get that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it reminds me, the sitting out, I mean, that was, traditionally, sorry, a Norse practice in Norse culture was like the sitting out, especially for poets. They'd sit out like on a mound often too. But even just for me and like in Western Pennsylvania culture, New York culture, Appalachian culture, hunting, like that's why so many people go hunting. And I hunt, and that's actually one of the big perks of hunting for me too. Besides the free range local organic meat, it's like you're sitting out there for hours just with I'm just sitting on the ground with that peripheral vision with the deer ears.
Yes.
And you really like things, you like watching birds and all sorts of other animals like weasels and chipmunks. And it really is you really get opened up in that kind of a practice, and things come up, and it's pretty amazing. 10 out of 10,
that was my first exposure to it too. Growing up was hunting, doing deer hunting or grouse hunting, and you get up and you get outside before dawn, before the rosy fingered dawn comes up over the horizon, and you see the changes in the energy. You sometimes, if you've got some sight opened already, you'll see the chi rising up from the earth at those early hours, and you spend this, it's a sacred communion that happens that you get to do for hours at a time, as you just sit and wait. And yeah, that's I'm very, very thankful for, being able to have those opportunities growing up. But it was, looking back, it was one of my first exposures to real magic, was doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a great thing for a lot of people who like that may be their only spiritual practice is hunting,
Or fishing,
or fishing, and it really is a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And it is a little different than like hiking, where you're actively going into the woods, but you're making noise, and you're not always in that headspace where you're like in your heart, and you can be really loud and chattery up here, and all the animals will respond to that. But as soon as you sit down and like relax and go into that like quiet place, then you start to see the birds coming out and the little rodents running by, and the deer might approach you, and you become like a part of it. So it's a little bit more conscious than even just like tromping through the forest.
Yeah, for sure. And most people, like, you go on a hike, you're on the same beaten trail, you're running through the same groove, in the same way that we run through the same grooves in our mind and in our head, without ever opening up and exploring something new. And more and more people I see, they're hiking, they've got their headphones in. It's like they
We don't need to get all complaining.
I mean, it's fascinating to me. I can get complaining. It's fascinating to me that people will put on nature sounds while they're working in their, in their little box, and then they'll go outside and they'll listen to, their beats while they're in the woods. And it's like, what is this weird thing that is going on right now?
Leave people alone. They're all just trying to survive.
Well, they could do it better. For their own sake, really. Just think about it. But yeah, I mean, that's in the very, very first lesson of the School in Heaven and Earth. And it's not something that's, explicitly a super powerful, ancient meditative or whatever. Well, it is all that.
Yes, yeah.
It is all that, but it's not sort of like a fancy visualization or anything like that. But we find, as a baseline,
like
people need to get more connected with the natural world in order to achieve the level of skill that they want to achieve. And when I was at the temple, at Five Immortals Temple last year, the abbot there said, you can't do real healing in the way that you want unless it's happening in connection with nature. And for them, at that temple, you've got to walk for an hour up a mountain to get there. They only recently got running water in like the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, all of the healing that they do for people and in the local villages, it very much happens in connection with nature. Just again, it was cool to see the kind of shamanic practices, essentially. And they would even describe it as like shamanic kung fu. But that was like a baseline. That's the foundation. It was the same, you look at the Picatrix, you look at the PGM, so many of the practices that they do, okay, you want to do an astrological magical ritual, or you want to summon an ancient Egyptian god, or you got to go out into the wilderness.
But in this world, people have to live in cities. And it's like these things can and must still be done, even if you live in a city, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not only possible, it's necessary for humanity and the planet to figure out, like, if all you have is, like one tree in a city square, you can do these things with, you can and should, and it's a service to you and your city to do that. It's like, so I had this one experience with whatever, I can just, say it. I used to host peyote ceremonies at my wellness center in Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. So it was when I was still trying to open meta, which you might remember, and which was very interesting because it was like totally not up to code at all. If you remember, I did a lot of the construction myself.
You did a lot of the electric yourself.
Yeah, but because of peyote ceremonies, I was able to get by like a lot of code. It was pretty cool. But anyway, when I was there, I I was very torn about, like staying in the city, right? Because I, very much wanted to get out. But the medicine came to me. This was like after the ceremony in meditation. And I had this vision of the medicine just like washing like she came as this like beautiful like redheaded woman, and was just like washing the whole city with like a paintbrush, making everything more beautiful. And she was like, what makes you think that I'm not every bit as powerful here? Right? Like it was just, and it was just like so profound. I was like in tears. It was like, you know, the medicines, the plants, like they're just as powerful in the city landscapes as they are in the wilderness, and they're absolutely needed. Right. So I mean, for me, it's like, yeah, the ancient sages might have gotten their, you know, enlightenment in the wilderness. And it's like, yeah, dude, it's harder for us now. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah,
It is
it is
a
hard.
lot. It's a lot harder to just be fucking human, period. Right.
No.
And it's a lot harder to progress, honestly, to progress spiritually. And I think it's good that we just acknowledge that fact. Right. But it's like, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be out there. Like, that's all the more reason that we have to be trying to connect to our invisible community and our guides. So it's like, for everybody who, you know, might be watching, who's like in a city, it's like, yo, thank you, warrior. Right. Like thank you for, you know, like taking up this task of, you know, still listening and watching and being a part of your local ecosystem where it is so much harder.
Yeah, I mean, don't ever let perfect be the enemy of good. And do what you can. There's so many Taoist masters that live in these huge cities in Shanghai and Beijing, and then every morning they just go to a local tree and do their practice. They do some circle walking around it in the city. You work with what you've got. Just know that you'll benefit a lot. Your health will improve just by spending whatever time you can, even just in a local city park or local piece of green.
Yeah, and you know, this may be the Kali Yuga or maybe the Age of Aquarius in a very Saturn-esque way.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But in a way, it's like the harder it is, the more resistance there is, the more power there is too, you know? And there's a lot of potential power in working in the city, and you know, I prefer I'm glad that I live out in the country. But I mean, even just being alive in these times, it's hard. There's a lot of resistance, but again, I think it makes it harder, but that also makes it more rewarding too. Yeah.
So what else do you all get into with the School of Heaven and Earth? What else are you teaching your students about?
That's it. Then it's after you do the sits and you start to connect with the energy and really feel it for yourself, then you start layering on some of the more technical sides of things. Crystal teaches the Herbalism, and I'll introduce people to some really foundational astrological practices.
So we do full, and we work with one plant every month. Right. So we open our diets on the new moon, and then we do where we, you know, just like do really somatic meditation with the plant. We coordinate that with of course, you know, talk about the astrological alignments and do meditations with the sign that the moon is in, right? And have teachings there. And then on the full moon, we journey with that plan. And sometimes these shift because, you know, the moon is all crazy like that. But yeah, so we do some, you know, it could be called shamanic journeying, could be called active imagination, but essentially just building from a somatic place the tools to, in whatever way you can, in whatever way you're open to getting messages from that plant spirit, as well as your invisible guides and allies. And we share from our journeys, and there's usually beautiful synchronicities, and people get beautiful messages about how to, you know, incorporate the medicine of the celestial cycle, as well as, you know, the guidance from that plant spirit into their lives. So those are two of the things that we do regularly. And then Matthew teaches different zodiacal meditations and practices once a month also.
Yeah, so I'll give people a practice that they can do. We'll practice that together for each solar season. So it's generally tailored to what sign the sun is occupying at that moment. We're in the process of implementing more explicit challenges to incentivize people to do the practices more and get more, experience more change from it. For Aquarius season coming up, we're going to have people placing a clear quartz in water and letting it sit out overnight in the stars. Because Aquarius season, Aquarius is naturally associated with the realm of the fixed stars, and of course the star card and the tarot. And not getting too much into the symbolism of Aquarius, but there is a lot of associations with Aquarius, and moving forward quickly into this bright, hopeful future, setting leaving behind the dark, stagnant past, and seeing that high, getting like your bird's eye view from everything, looking at the world from the point of view of every single star in the skies above. I know that resonates with you, Isaac, with your Aquarius moon, or at least in tropicals, an Aquarius moon. I think it might be capped in sidereal. It's both. It's Aquarius moon either way. Yeah.
Really?
So you just got the Aquarius moon.
Yeah, it's 0 degrees in sidereal, so it's Sandi.
Okay. Yeah. So you double Aquarius then. Yeah. So that's so essentially doing a practice that basically making an elixir, and that it's capturing starlight and then finding ways to, or imbibing and drinking that water so you can start to transform your body with that starlight in a very, very grounded, practical way.
Cool.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we have a whole course. It's like we have like different course programs to take you through like the astrological material and some of the ways of communicating with the plant spirits, and learning how to learn from the plants yourself, right? And also how to learn from your body, how to treat yourself, essentially being your own doctor and not giving over your bodily autonomy to the men in the white coats. And I think it's perfectly fine to go to the men in white coats. And Western emergency medicine, I think, is absolutely fabulous, right? Like that's what Western medicine is really good at. But yeah, being able to trust your body and have an intimate relationship with your body and tend to it, so that you also know how to tend to the earth, because they are one and the same.
Yeah, and maybe if you keep in balance, then you won't have to go to the men in the white coats.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And so do you get into like the chart as a diagnostic tool with your students, or is that something that you more do with your clients if you're doing a consultation?
We do. I teach not so much using the chart as a diagnostic tool within the program in the School of Heaven and Earth, because it's a little bit more elaborate, but I'm understanding the foundational architecture of astrology, understanding the planet signs, houses, and aspects from a classical Hellenistic angle. And I found that, as I've been teaching astrology for upwards of over 4 years now, that people take to it best when you move slowly and you work with foundations one step at a time, and you keep your architecture as simple as possible, and don't layer on too much at once, because it'll very quickly become like a house of cards that you put another piece on top and everything starts to fall down. I think that the symbolism of astrology is very simple at its core. And in the classical Hellenistic side of things, there's so much overlap between the meanings of the planets and how that informs the meanings of the signs and the houses through the planetary joys and the rulership scheme. And in my course Gnosis, I trace all of that back to like a couple core concrete philosophical principles, just to make it as simple as possible for people. But I think the way that astrology is taught a lot of time, or like you just do like a Google search, or like what does Sun in Virgo mean for me? Oftentimes it can get convoluted for people. People have trouble rocking it. So that's the kind of the pedagogical approach that I teach with astrology. I think you have a similar approach with herbalism, kind of starting simple and branching out.
Well, and people pick up on it, right? So it's like, as we say we're dieting Damiana for Scorpio season, right? Like if you come and you work with Damiana and you are taking in the medicine of Scorpio season, you're going to quickly figure out what Scorpio's, rulership of the, like sex organs, and the, various, functionings of the, how your body responds to, those hormonal fluctuations during the season. It's like, you're going to figure out how that shows up in your chart, right? And it's like, I give like some teachings about that, as well, where, like, so we're working with Solomon seal right now for Capricorn season and doing, meditations for the bones, right? And you can, so, you learn it in a very, in a visceral and embodied way, how that's showing up in your own chart. And I think that that's probably one of the, that's not the quickest way to learn, right? But it is an embodied way to learn.
Yeah.
And I have a course, Gaia, where we go more, more in depth. But we actually haven't really started teaching straightforward, like Renaissance style,
Medical.
like medical.
Yeah. It's on the list of things to ask.
Mostly just teaching in a more intuitive way, the diagnostics.
I teach some of that. I teach the diagnostics in the course Gnosis, and then I go into remediations towards the end.
Oh yeah,
remediations towards the end. But that's what they've understood the system of astrology a little bit more. But at least with our approach in the School of Heaven, excuse me, in the School of Heaven and Earth, it comes back to having that encounter with the energy, experiencing the energy, feeling the energy. If you want to know what Mars is about, you could read a million lists of keywords online, or you could do some meditative practices and do some, gazing at the planet Mars and starting to take the energy in, work with some stones and crystals that are associated with Mars, and you can start to feel what Mars is all about. And that's kind of getting it on a much deeper level, I think, than you could ever, like, the keywords are all pointing at something. They're the finger pointing at the moon. But if you can just encounter and experience the moon, then your training will happen a lot more efficiently, I'd say.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, in my training in astrology too, like one of the main practices I was doing was like planetary initiations. And like there was a period of time where, every Monday I would do like a hexagram ritual of the moon, and then the Tuesday I would do the hexagram ritual of the of Mars and et cetera. And it was and various things like that. Invoke the energy, meditate on the energy, and then you really get to feel that energy on it in that deep embodied way. And I think it changes you on a more fundamental level, and it's changing you. Then it's not just your mind. It's
memorizing keywords, right?
Just memorizing things is like learning and being. It's like the difference between learning and like becoming, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what separates someone who is like perhaps technically proficient versus somebody who is a real like a real healer and a seer, even, or someone who has had an encounter, who has been exposed to the actual power that makes astrology work in the first place, versus just understanding how it works kind of in abstracto or in theory.
Yeah. I think it's an important part of the of becoming an astrologer.
Yes. Yeah. Becoming an astrologer with a capital A, as a kind of priest, as a kind of doctor in their own right, that involves the spiritual practices, that involves a more holistic approach to your curriculum, to your education. And that's one of the things that we love about the Vedic tradition, is that there is this unbroken lineage of that has been transmitted student to teacher for millennia at this point, depending on how old the nakshatras are, 5,000, 6,000 years, a long time.
Yeah.
Very, very long time. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's hard to know for sure, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's a pretty old, like the current in it is extremely old. It's been there for a very, very long time. And it's unfortunate that, due to Christianity, and I also think specifically Protestantism, and just the general thrust of like the noeticization, like the mentalism that we see in the West, like they're more and more divorced from our bodies, from our energy, from our like lived experience. In so many ways, we're getting just trapped more and more in our head.
Yeah, I think Aristotle started that, honestly.
I think Aristotle actually had a big part to play in that. And there's a lot of points from then on, but the Industrial Revolution, the science, like
Not a fan of Aristotle.
Enlightenment and all of that, I think was like
Yeah.
kind of the nail in the
Yeah.
coffin, because there were still, I mean, those Renaissance astrologers in England, and I mean in Italy, Ficino, like all of them, they were pretty
Mhm.
amazing. But they're
Yeah.
that 1700 to 1900 time frame, they're really kind of
Things get yeah, it got rough. And with the the Enlightenment and the late 18th throughout the 18th century.
For me personally, and something that we're both trying to do, since we're here, it's like we're interested in, or at least especially me, I'm interested in looking at these techniques from like a pre-Socratic mindset, even,
Yeah.
like I'm, much more interested in finding that, like old folk vein, much like Paracelsus did, right? Like I'm a huge Paracelsus fangirl. Like I would have like a poster of Paracelsus
Right? Yeah.
on my wall, and
You're also a Heraclitus fangirl.
yes.
Heraclitus.
Hey, I love
And
Heraclitus.
Empedocles.
Empedocles. I mean,
yeah.
we actually, my cohort Gaia actually wrote a song called "Punk Rock Grandpa Empedocles." So we're like trying, because there are ways, I think we know, like the Western patriarchal mindset does look at the world in a particular way that is inherently less enchanted and less magical, right? And I think it consumes so much of what it wants to create.
Mhm.
Right. So it's like Paracelsus, like walked around, and a lot of the old Renaissance musicians, they walked around and they talked to old folk wives. You know what I mean? And it's like they knew like how you get knowledge is sitting, listening, watching, talking to a plant. It's like old school science is literally just watching and mimicking the workings of nature. Right.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with these, like big alchemist setups.
Right.
It's like this is me, my
Correct.
body, my field. We're connecting, we're jiving, we're doing magic. It's not me locked away in a tower. Right. And so that's kind of, we're using, these, a lot of these texts, but the fact is that if it was written down, it's probably, it's divorced from the tradition that it's trying to freeze. So we're trying to have that, like direct experience to re-enchant something that even by the time that it was written down had already been a little disenchanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think doing the dieting with the herbs is such a great way to do that. Definitely.
Mm.
Yeah, which is, from the word diet, comes from the Shipibo tradition. We both worked in the Shipibo vein. I studied in the Amazon with the Shipibo for a while.
Do you want to maybe
And,
tell us about that process? Like what is a diet, and how do you do it?
yes, okay. Well, okay. Forefront this with, like could be getting into the, appropriation vein here, but I try to, learn as, learn. I try to not teach Shipibo style, right? Like I learned from them, but I'm, working with these. Okay, let me just back up here. All right, you're working with one plant, right? Like in the traditional sense, you would be cutting out almost as much as everything that is not the plant you're dieting as possible, right? Like an ideal diet is you maybe not even water, right? Like I'm just taking in this plant, like a full-on fast is the most powerful way to do a diet, right? But the way we do it in She is cutting out as much excess stimulus or excess stimulation as you can, while knowing that perfect can't be the enemy of good, so that your nervous system is as sensitive to the fluctuations of to the voice, right? To the changes that the plant brings into your body. So we try to cut out as much sugar as possible, try to cut out as much screen time as possible, try to, find as much calm and peace during the day as possible, cutting out caffeine as much as possible. You want to diminish, extra, spicy foods are good for you, but spicy foods are really stimulating. So cutting out as much spicy food as possible, and just making yourself as much, and also finding a baseline. Right. So like there might be other herbs that you've been working with for a while, and you can keep those because you know how your body acts with them, but not adding in another plant. right, while you're dieting. So you want the primary variable in your life as much as possible to be the plant that we're dieting. And also when you consume the plant, making it a ritualistic experience, like recognizing this is another being that you're trying to form a friendship with. So it's like you're sitting down at a cafe, or you're sitting down in a living room across a friend, and your focus and your attention is on that friend. It's like, hello, how are you? And maybe expressing, like, I really appreciated that dream you gave me last night. I really appreciate that you've been helping me feel more calm regularly. And then there's other small rituals that, we recommend sometimes, like making an offering, or, lighting a candle. But there's all kinds of different ways that you can approach that meeting when you actually take that plant into your body, to just make it a special marked experience during your day, so that the workings of the plant in your life can become more prominent. And the ideal at the end of the diet, right, is that you can actually call on that plant for help, right? That you can have a relationship with that plant without that plant even being present.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you have that plant in your field. You have a relationship with that plant, right? And in the Shipibo tradition, right, that would be like having the song of the plant, right? So it's like you can sing the song of that plant, and that plant will come, right? Because these plants are actual, we call them, like a vibratory fields. They're, like living beings with, spirits just as much as we have spirits.
So how long do you generally do the plant diet?
So
full month?
there's
Full lunar cycle?
In the School of Heaven and Earth, we do a full moon cycle. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are, in the Amazon, there are all different kinds of different plants require different diet times. Like some plants, Chirixananga, one that I dieted, you typically don't diet for more than 2 weeks. But there are some that you need to, like big trees, that you need to diet for like 3 months.
I think there's some master teachers that the diet is like a year and a half, I think, right? You like break it up. You don't generally do that whole year and a half at once, but it takes a long time to reach the end.
Yeah, like Stephen Herod Buhner writes about this in his books, right? Like Osha is a plant that it takes a long time to form a relationship with, and that you have to treat with like a lot of respect, and approach with a lot of respect, that like big bear medicine, right?
Yeah.
And then there's like dandelion is much more approachable.
Right.
Yeah, right. Dandelion is much more
much more accessible.
Yeah.
And then in that tradition, generally your diet would be, you would kind of go into seclusion in the jungle, as you would do a lot of that practice. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, we've done some like a plant initiation with like Pam Montgomery, which is very, very similar kind of thing. And basically a plant diet, but in
Fasting and
fasting
drinking
and
elixir of the plant, and making masks, and having like counsel with the plants, and it's very cool.
I think it's a really powerful way of working with the plants for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
not the only way.
Not the only way, but a great way. A fantastic
effective way. Yeah.
So to go back to the diagnostic tool of the chart, do you use that in your like day-to-day practice? Like, do you guys work together on with patients or clients sometimes, or?
We don't do readings together so much anymore.
We started out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, when I first got back from the Amazon, one of the messages that I came back with was to start doing astrology readings as part of my herbalism practice. This was back in, I think, early 2019. So we came back and we formed this like team reading, Earth Star Magic.
Yeah.
But then it was really hard to coordinate our schedules.
Yeah.
So I'll consult, like sometimes I'll literally like press pause. I'm like, do you mind if I ask my husband a quick question?
She'll come and
come and ask him something, and then come back, and sometimes he'll, like ask me about an herb, right? So we both still, like, I tell people all the time, it's like, I would never do an herbalism session without somebody's chart. It's like, I've had clients that even like other practitioners be like, what I've been working on this with somebody for like 6 months. And it's like, but the thing is, it's like, you can find, it's like, well, I know what it's really clear what the root cause is here. And the most difficult thing is figuring out how to approach it with them, right? Like my biggest thing with the chart is like, how do I talk to this person about this? How are they going to be open to hearing it, right? Because a lot of times, honestly, it's a really sensitive topic, right? But it's like really clear that I had a really abusive father, and there was probably something around this age that we're going to need to talk about, right? If we're going to get to this issue. And it's just incredibly effective. It's like, it's wildly effective how quickly you can get to the root of, you know, particularly chronic issues. Most of the people that I see have a lot of people that I see have chronic somewhere, some phase of the development of an autoimmune disorder. That's just a lot of who I get. I get people with, you know, gut troubles who are developing, who have chronic pain, or, you know, are developing that, have, you know, like chronic anxiety. Right. And, you know, other things too, but a lot of people that I see have that.
And I mean, in the great, like, interrelated tapestry and network that is the human body and the different organ networks and systems, when you're trying to get to root issues, what is going on at the bottom, having the chart as a diagnostic tool is very, very helpful. It's really, really useful for you to kind of like parse through all the different symptoms and say, like, what's the core problem here?
Yeah. I found the same thing too. It's like you can see like where the root of the problem is. And sometimes it's not even like, I mean, it's like past life, or it's like an ancestor problem, or it's, you know, you can't, you're not going to get that from a you know, without looking at the chart, or having somebody who can access that information in some other way, like a psychic or a shamanic practitioner or something like that.
Yeah. And then you can even see what their coping mechanisms are, like how they're distracting themselves from feeling it. Yeah. Right. It's like, oh, well, you're clearly, you know, far too focused on your career right now. You're pretending to be super concerned with money, and you're not actually. You just don't want to feel this thing, and you are constantly distracting yourself with taking in information and media consumption. Like it's like then you can figure out plants, and that's the thing. There are plants who know how to deal with all of those things, right? Yeah. And it's a beautiful tool. And of course, you probably know the famous Hippocrates quote, "The father of medicine, a doctor who doesn't know how to read the stars isn't a doctor but a fool."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
there's only so many crowds you can say that in, but it's true.
Yeah.
Sure. This crowd.
Yeah.
This crowd's good. Yeah, I mean, it's good for, you know, like I can tell what kind of defenses people are going to have going into a reading just by which signs are predominant, or which planets are close to conjoin the moon and that kind of thing. And you just kind of work around it, or just poke more. But I've also a good maxim that Crystal reminded me of a couple of days ago. I first heard from Robert Zoller, famous Latin astrological text, is that the chart is always right. Like the chart is always right. So if you say something, or you give a diagnosis, or you give it a delineation for the person, it doesn't quite fit, then it's going to be something similar, but you got to figure out like, well, how exactly it fits for them, or they've got a wall up.
Help them remember that was an issue, or that.
Right. Yeah, they won't remember it, or like
they won't remember it.
Sometimes people. Or you've just got the wrong, because like sometimes the moon with Mars can mean a couple different things, and it depends on what things are coming to you, and that's why spiritual discipline is so important. So the right one comes.
Oh, right.
Yes, exactly. As you got to keep working at it until you find like what hits. I remember I did a reading for somebody, and I was looking at their zodiacal releasing, which is a Time Lord technique, and they started in a 10th house period, and so they're like, I was like, okay, you must have gotten started off like from your career at a very, very young age. Maybe your parents had you doing stuff. And there were also a bunch of Gemini. So they were like, no, that didn't happen. But then later on in the reading, they said, yeah, my parents started me out doing ballet when I was 4. I'm like, okay, all right, well, and then I have to tie it back in and say, hey, did you see this disconnect that happened here? But that kind of thing happens a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I had a client that I had to, just very very boldly. Like Sim's like, well, the chart is always right. So let's figure out how this is true. And I thought that like, cause I was like really frustrated with this person. They're like kind of like a big shot in their field, you know, and it was, you know, I don't know if you have this, Isaac, but when somebody buys somebody else a reading,
Oh yeah, that's different.
or
Oh, yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
sometimes we think we're not even going to do those anymore, but I'm like, I'm up for the challenge. But then so I was like, oh man, that session went terrible. But then the next day, the person who bought them that reading got back to me, was like, we were up all night talking about that session. And
Oh.
it was like, it like hit hard. And then I had another session with that person the very next week.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Good. Yeah. Well, sometimes it takes a
you
while to
have
get
to,
through the defenses, and
Yeah.
then it's hard to look at some things too,
Yeah.
Yeah. Or sometimes you see like the a little wave of fear come over people's minds, and they thought, okay, this was just going to be like a fun thing, and now they're actually like speaking into things I don't want to talk about or I don't want to look at.
Right. Well, it's also
Yeah.
important not to, if someone doesn't want to get into something, to not talk about that. There are other things to talk about. But
Yeah.
No, and I totally feel that. But this person, it was like it was a kind of an emergency situation. There was a reason this person had somebody who loved them buy them a reading.
There were,
right.
like, some
And
It was a serious
serious
health
health
issue.
issues. Yeah.
and yeah, if there's something that needs to be addressed and you can see what the underlying causes, there's got it is also like your responsibility to bring it up in some way too.
Yeah.
And find a way to communicate it.
But then every once in a while, maybe you have to rectify the chart. Like maybe there was the wrong birth time by 10, 15 minutes. And have you ever found that?
I have. Yeah.
He
There's been
rectifies
so I rectify charts. Sometimes it's pretty easy. I think of a couple times where somebody comes to me and the chart is like Leo rising, but the ascendant is at 2 degrees, and they're very mellow and relaxed and like, oh, it's nice to meet you. Hi. And like, okay, you're not Leo rising.
Yeah.
They just move that back a little bit, and then we've got the actual chart. You're a Cancer rising. For chart, if I get a chart and it says just 10 a.m. or it's like right on the hour and it's clearly approximated, then I'll probably do some rectification before I ever touch zodiacal releasing, because that works with the lots, and the lots, they change minute by minute. So I'm not going to start making these sweeping predictive assumptions unless I know for sure that their lots are where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. So lots. I generally use divisional charts for rectification in the Vedic context, but because you can get to like the D9 changes every 15 minutes, and then the other charts change every smaller and smaller numbers of minutes.
Right.
But but I've also I've heard from a lot of people that a lot of people's birth times are wrong by
sorry, say that again.
Sorry, I've heard that a lot of nurses, especially in the 80s and 90s, 70s, wouldn't necessarily put the right birth time down on the chart on the birth certificate.
It wasn't like as important.
Yeah, so I pretty much always do rectification. So what are the main rectification techniques that you use? Is zodiacal really?
I don't have like a list of like specific techniques that I'll draw up. I'll generally just go through, like if they have a specific window, I'll look at all of the different house placements very closely for each of those possible risings. And then I'll generally go through a couple Saturn transits to see what was showing up most strongly. So, for instance, like seeing the Saturn return, there's an option with Saturn in the 6th, 7th. Were they hustling a lot during their Saturn return? Did they have lots of crises at work? Was they have a boss that was driving them crazy? Or did they go through a major breakup or have like serious issues with one-on-one relationships? And that will generally tell me, okay, this is the rising sign to work with. But then oftentimes, even just on its own, the vibe, if it's just between 3 rising signs, even just the vibe of one of those 3 rising signs will be pretty clear. And then that coupled with the house placements of the sun and the moon, telling me like what's most important to them, that will generally get it for me.
Yeah.
Cool.
And at least for me, there's the time that's on the birth certificate. But then I don't know about you, but a lot of people had the moms who had the little baby book, who wrote down the time that they were born, and that's going to be correct.
Yeah.
Because mom's not gonna. Did you know that you have those little blue?
I had that.
Blue books that your mom keeps. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
Cool.
You don't. Your mom
I
don't?
don't.
I
I
have
don't.
one.
Yeah, you have one. I don't remember. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know if I had that.
I don't think I have one.
I bet your mom kept a baby book.
Maybe. Yeah.
But yeah, one of the first questions in the opening of the baby book, they used to give them in the 80s and the 90s.
Okay.
To moms, one of the is the time that you were born.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it's like
So
your
that's it. So if you have somebody who only has the
vaccinations.
time on the birth certificate, ask them to cross-reference
Ask them
it.
for the
Ask
baby
them if their
book.
mom has a
Okay.
baby book and if they can cross-reference it.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I find that like with the rising sign, if you're doing like usually about a 2 hour per rising sign, it's a little bit easier to tell between that. But then sometimes it's not. Like if there's a planet and it can be more difficult sometimes. But to get it down more narrower, I'll use the divisional charts and like to.
With rising sign place, remember, like exact place can be really important too, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Mary,
Oh, yeah.
Mary's chart, just a different hospital
Yeah.
Really?
changed her rising sign. She had like the town, but it was like put in this specific hospital, and it changed, and her chart made so much more sense.
Yeah. So she had
Wow.
she had her place of birth as Pittsburgh. I asked, that gave her Leo rising. She's like, I hate that. That doesn't make sense for me. So I said, well, what hospital were you born in? And she's like, oh, okay, I was born in Ross Township Hospital. That made it Cancer rising.
So it's far
Which-
enough of a difference. Wow.
It's
Makes
enough of the
complete
difference.
sense.
Yeah. Which I
That's
was
good.
surprised by. I was like, these are pretty much in the same latitude. How could this possibly even be that much of a difference? But it was. So yeah,
That's
it's
wild.
always yeah, if ever the ascendant is very close by degree, I'll ask for the hospital specifically,
Okay.
just
Cool.
in case.
That's a good thing to know
Yeah,
too.
that is a good one.
Yeah, so this has been a lot of fun catching up
Yeah,
and
thank you.
talking about this kind of stuff. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Gnosis and when that's getting started?
Yeah, so Gnosis is a class that teaches horoscopic astrology, the fundamental architecture, planet signs, houses, and aspects. And we also go through transits and zodiacal releasing. But then what I do that not a lot of people in the Western tradition do is I also layer in ritual magic based off of a lot of the practices that come out of the PGM and the Picatrix, as well as the Asclepius dialogue with Hermes Trismegistus, which is one of the oldest sources of astrological magic that we have. And then remediation or remediatory practices. And so you get practical exposure to the energies of the planets and practical methods that you can use to transform your life and change your life around. Like, in terms of manifestation, this to me is one of the most powerful techniques of manifestation that I've come across, is this actual ancient, authentic lineage of ritual and working with spirits who want to help you already, but they're just waiting for you to ask. And as we discussed, earlier in this episode with spiritual practice, I teach a lot of Taoist practice from the beginning, because for me, that is what separates somebody who's technically skilled with somebody who is a real astrologer with a capital A. And for people who really want the juice, they want the power, they want to be the real deal, they want to see the spirits, feel the energy. They want to be a magician with a capital M. Daily spiritual practices like the ones that I teach in Gnosis are, will help you get there. So it's the only course I know of that teaches all of these things at once. And this will be my 8th time teaching this class. I've had a lot of fun teaching it, and I've seen lots of concrete transformation in people's lives who go through and who do the work. I've had some students who now have some great flourishing astrological practices in their own right. I've seen people who don't have as much of an interest in being an astrologer. They just want that to be another tool in their toolkit, but they're an artist, they're a musician, they're a poet, they're a doctor, and they are interested using the connection with the planets and the stars to really understand what they're supposed to be doing and to start connecting with allies in the heavens above that can help them create the kind of life that they really want to create. So it's open for enrollment until January 24th. And if you're listening to this and that sounds exciting to you, then I'd love to have you in.
Awesome. And is it so it's an online, is it like a cohort based, or is it a self-taught, self-guided?
Yeah, it's cohort based. This cohort will begin on January 24th. It's for 5.5 months. It's a mix of written lessons and live material. You get 11 written lessons, and then there's a live Q&A with me for each of those lessons. And then we also do meet additionally for 6 times to practice looking at natal charts, and we meet 5 times to practice the meditations that I teach as well. So a total of 11 lessons and a total of 22 live sessions where we meet together to make sure that you can really master the material that we're covering there.
Awesome.
Cool.
Sounds really cool. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, well, how can people find out more about you, like, or catch up with everything that both of you are doing?
Yeah, so there's my site, ancientastrology.com, and then Crystal's, you said
crystalwoodling.com.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
And we're also on Instagram with the same handles, Crystal Woodling and Ancient Astrology.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, I would love to hang out in the real world sometime, guys.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
great to see you again.
You get back.
Great to
Great.
see you.
Bye.
Cheers. Thanks.